Tonight, are you safe at home? Right now, wherever you're watching this broadcast from, are you certain that a relative or intimate partner will not do you harm? Well, President Uhuru Kenyatta aptly captured the severity of this threat when last month he directed the National Crime Research Center to find out the causes for increased gender-based violence over the COVID-19 period. And as if the many cases that necessitated the president's intention to act were not enough, just a week before the report is due to him, a father in Bungoma burnt his teenage daughter's private parts. Now, there is some madness that is going on behind closed doors, violence that is threatening to destroy not just one family, but an entire country if we do not wake up now. So joining me tonight is Court of Appeal Judge Martha Koome, the Deputy Governor of Makueni County, Honorable Adelina Mwau, a county which, by the way, has set up a safe house for survivors, and the Executive Director of the Coalition on Violence Against Women, Wairimu, Munyinyi-Wahome. And ladies, welcome to you all on Punchline. Wairimu, I want to start with you because you've just heard of the horrific case that took place last week, a teenager's private parts burnt by her father. It's unfathomable that the home, which should be a place of nurture and safety, has become a war zone. Since the lockdown began, it has been reported that we are seeing a rise in gender-based violence. Is that the case, or are these cases now simply more visible than before?
Thank you, Anne. I would say that it's a case of both. So there's definitely an increase in the number of GBV cases being reported during this particular time. Last month, OCHA, a UN agency, reported that there has been a 13% increase in the number of GBV cases reported in Kenya. And even from COVAW's perspective, the number of GBV cases being reported to us on a weekly basis from when the lockdown started in comparison to before the lockdown is definitely higher. However, it is also true that the visibility around the cases of GBV has also increased, which is a good thing because previously a lot of cases were going unreported. So even as we discuss today, we shall be discussing about cases of GBV that have been reported. We still have hundreds of cases that go unreported in this country. So definitely, yes. Right. An increase, yes, and visibility as well. Okay,
Wairimu, but what would you say is then fueling GBV in Kenya?
It's a myriad of factors, Anne. So you cannot say that one particular cause, that there is one particular cause of GBV in the country. But we do know that GBV is primarily driven by power dynamics. So you have a situation where a perpetrator of GBV feels that they want to assert themselves over another person. And they want to do this because they want to communicate that they are powerful or they can control this particular person, and that this particular person has very little of room or space to stand up for themselves or fight back. Right. But then we also know that on other levels, stress factors are a major cause, especially when the particular person under stress has no outlet in terms of managing the same. So when things pile up and you have no outlet, then eventually violence becomes your last resort. We also have social upbringing. Most people who grow up in violent homes, when they are not cancelled or they don't get to a point where they understand that violence is bad, tend to replay violence in their own spaces and in their own homes. So really, it's a combination of factors.
Right. But before we see the horrific violence at home, there are usually telltale signs of the deterioration of that relationship of whatever kind. Things like the intimidation you've talked about, or threats, or shoving, and so on and so forth. So let's bring in now Lady Justice Martha Koome to the conversation now. Judge, in the very first instance, there is the provision for one to seek a protection order as outlined in the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act. So what exactly is this order? How does one secure it, and how does it benefit survivors of violence?
Thank you, Anne, for inviting me to this Punchline And I'm happy to share the forum with an excellent defender of human rights, Honorable Adelina Mwau, and Wairimu COVAW is in the front line trying to help our society cope with this problem of domestic violence. And the legal framework is there. We have laws that speak against violence of any kind. Violence is a criminal offense. No one has a right to violate another. And it begins with the Constitution that has a very clear Bill of Rights that outlaws all forms of violence. Be it domestic, it is even worse, like you said, when it happens in the domestic front where people are supposed to feel safe and secure. We have the penal laws, the criminal penal code. We have the Sexual Offences Act, and we have the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act, and even the Matrimonial Causes Act has provisions where someone can seek an order when you are threatened with violence. You can seek a protection order, and the protection order comes in many forms. It can come by way of the perpetrator, the one who is perpetrating violence, being restrained from coming home. The perpetrator can also be arrested and charged with a criminal offense and can even be denied bail, depending on the circumstances of each case. If there was threat to life, that person, of course, needs to be separated from peace-loving members of the family. The problem we have, Anne, is our patriarchal kind of society. When violence happens at home, we seem to tolerate it. But to me, I think it needs to be taken more seriously. If somebody is actually being violated when they are among the loved ones, there is no explanation for that. So we should exercise zero tolerance to domestic violence. It should be reported. It should be documented. The problem we have is that when it's happening within the home, there are dynamics. Once you report, you return to the same home. Perhaps you are a woman with children living in an extended family, right, with your husband's family. Right. Now, once you report him to the police and he is arrested, there will be disquiet in that home. Perhaps the parents-in-law will not understand why you have had their son locked up. Right. So the society, to some extent, is tolerating violence. And we have had the numbers spiking. To me, we have COVID-19 pandemic, but domestic violence, abuse of children, abuse of women, men, boys, elderly, it's just another pandemic that we have to think about. And it is happening when we are limited. Even access to justice is also a problem because it takes a lot of sacrifice and commitment for one to go and report a matter at the police, record a statement, follow through that case to the courts. Right. The courts are not open optimally. It's we are rendering limited services because, of course, some courts are even closed because of the COVID. Therefore, this is a matter that the society needs to take seriously and explore other means of ensuring that it is dealt with. You don't even have to go to the formal courts, but it can be dealt with within the structures that exist. Nyumba Kumi can declare that we do not want violence within our Nyumba Kumi structure. The chiefs, the OCS, all of them can join hands and speak about against domestic violence and declare that it is unwanted and unacceptable, and even agree among themselves what they will do to the perpetrators who disturb the families and disturb the other members of the household and the community.
Thank you, Judge, for that. So let's now bring in the Deputy Governor of Makueni County, Honorable Adelina Mwau. What were the issues in Makueni that led to the establishment of a safe house, and how does the safe house work?
Yeah, we in Makueni, before COVID-19, we had already established a sexual recovery center in Makueni level 4. With the support, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Nairobi Women's Hospital. Also, we had also signed a memorandum of understanding to work with Equality Now. So we had established this center, sexual recovery center. But during COVID, the cases increased. And since our recovery center is in level 4, we decided to actually look at a safe place where women who have problems of domestic violence can be housed. And this was necessitated by several cases that were being reported in the police station, several cases that were coming to the hospital, and therefore we had to set up this. Actually, this was an advice from all the counties were advised by the Ministry of Social Services, the National Ministry of Gender and Social Services were advised, and we were able, as Makueni County, to actually pick it up and then identify a place where we could, a safe place, because it has to be really safe. Identify a place is in a hospital. Next to it, there is a police station, there is a gate, and that's where we set up. It was like an emergency to deal with issues of domestic violence for those women really want to find security. And in fact, we had 5 women during that period. 2 of them, one from Kakamega, she couldn't get past Nairobi. She had relatives in Nairobi, but she couldn't get past Nairobi. The other one is Kisii. She couldn't actually get past Nairobi to go to Kisii. So it was an emergency to deal with issues of domestic violence, sexual and gender-based violence, something that we had already started.
Right.
Like
let me ask you this, Deputy Governor.
Center.
Right. Let me ask you this, though, Deputy Governor. There is the issue, though, of the safety, of course, and you've explained very well exactly how this safe house is situated that does ensure that it is, in fact, a safe house. But what plans do you have to ensure that that shelter provision is, in fact, sustainable in terms of both human and financial resources?
Of course, this was taken up by the county. We have a department of gender and social services, and therefore we have a budget. We have a doctor, a female doctor, and a male doctor. We also have a counseling unit within the county, and then also we have social workers within the county. So it is actually rooted in the county government. We are coming up with policy so that it is actually policy laws, so that it's something that is budgeted for. So it is actually done. It is actually being run from the county.
All right.
Before COVID, we had already started to think of a dinner where we could start a safe house. But since COVID, then we realized that there is an emergency that we need to respond to.
All right.
And therefore, the county government of Makueni is the arm, it's actually under a department, under two departments, under the health department and also the social and gender department.
There are those who opine that shelters lead to families breaking up. Others feel that shelters are only available for female survivors of violence. What's your take on this?
Thank you, Anne. Establishment of shelter to shelter victims of violence can never break families. It is violence that breaks and destroys a family. We need to ask ourselves what came first. It is violence that has visited our society in a big way. And therefore, we have an obligation which is anchored in the Constitution to offer protection to the vulnerable members of our society, to protect them from violence. And this is why it is the obligation of every county government to establish shelter. Statistics are there to show the number of victims, children, women, elderly, young boys also who have been sodomized. And even men, we have a percentage of men who are also victims of violence, and as their cases are being processed, they need to be sheltered, a place where one can feel safe to reflect and think and get justice. So for me, a shelter is a service that should be provided just the same way we provide other services like medical, police, judiciary. A shelter goes with all other service provisions or requirements by the society. I really commend the Makueni County that has established a shelter for domestic violence, or call it gender-based violence. And it is time the other county governments picked it up, because it is a service that is needed by their constituents, by the people, by the citizen. And I believe once they are set, these cases will be processed in a more coordinated and professional manner, because no one will be put under pressure to withdraw what we have already seen, because families, victims withdraw these cases because of pressure coming from the society, because you are going back to the same violent setup. And this should be the obligation of the government to support. It should not be the civil society or NGOs or charitable organizations setting up a shelter. It's the business of the government to provide this service, because it has many facets to it. It has legal, it has social, it has economic, it has security. So it's the responsibility of the county government to set this up. They are mentioned under the Protection Against Domestic Violence Act as safe houses. Who is to provide the safe house? It is the government.
Right. Right. Wairimu, your organization is calling on the government to set up shelters to rescue victims of violence in a campaign dubbed Wape Kimbilio. What exactly is it that you want the government to do?
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. So, as COVAW, we have assessed the GBV response system in the country. And, you know, given what we are able to do and what other organizations are able to do, plus the interactions between the judiciary, the law enforcement agencies, when the cases of GBV spiked up during this COVID-19 period, and based on an analysis of the domestic violence cases that were being and continue to be reported to COVAW, we realized that in the process of interacting with GBV survivors, some of whom were in very dangerous spaces, even a recommendation to move away to a safe space was difficult for them to enact because they had no alternative abode to go to. And so we realized that over time, a lot of the laws and the policies related to GBV have been implemented, especially in terms of the reporting. There's been a lot of awareness raising, but we realize that on the whole, the provision of shelters has not been done very well. Now, one might ask, are we then talking of creating yet another policy in this country related to GBV? And the answer is no. Now, there is a safe spaces and application model manual in this country that was developed under the leadership of the Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender. So anyone who wants to establish a shelter, any county government that has the political and goodwill to do what Makueni has done and for sustainability purposes, already has a manual in place that can provide guidance on how to go about it. So the Wape Kimbilio campaign by COVAW is to say, we need to strengthen the GBV referral system and to invest in the well-being of survivors. And one of the ways of doing this is providing safe spaces and especially shelters so that people can get a place for healing. These are temporary shelters. They're not permanent, but then it provides a space for persons, for survivors to heal away from perpetrators.
Right. But
and we know people have lost lives. Yes.
You're right. People have lost lives. I beg your pardon. But why should this be the government's responsibility? And whose responsibility in government is it? Is it social services? Is it the gender ministry? Is it the internal security ministry? Who exactly should be responsible?
First and foremost, the responsibility for responding to GBV is both a national and county government responsibility, to be clear. And that is why we also have at county level GBV policy models that have been developed by the National Gender and Equality Commission. And, you know, we have several counties that have duplicated those to guide their operations against GBV. When it comes to who is responsible for the provisions of shelters, we cannot say that this particular responsibility is vested in one, say, ministry over the other. Given the intensity and seriousness of the GBV issue, I would say that currently we would require a more enhanced national government response to what is going on in the country. But in the long run, in terms of ensuring that shelters are provided for in the plans, in the county integrated development plans and supported by budgets, the best place to vest the provision of shelters would be in the counties. But because we are in a crisis, it would be important if we had the Ministry of Public Service, Youth and Gender in collaboration with the Ministries of Interior, Health, Education, working together to really find solutions for what is happening in this country.
Wairimu, finally, what are the warning signs that somebody could be in a potentially life-threatening situation, and how do they get in touch with COVAW?
So the telling signs differ, Anne. For some people, and for most people, it's the actual physical violence that is meted on them, the beatings, the slappings, you know, the stabbings, you know, use of objects to harm other people. For others, it's the psychological and emotional abuse and the threats and intimidation. Most of the survivors of domestic violence will say that, you know, it started with subtle threats. I will kill you, or I will beat you up one day, and then the perpetrator actually then one day carries out makes the threat real. So for different situations, there's different signs for different situations. What is important is that a survivor is empowered enough to report. You can also tell if, say, it is in the workplace. When you have an employee or a colleague that is occasionally missing work and is unwilling to explain what the situation is, if it is in a school setup, when you have people that, you know, are withdrawn and do not want to talk, you know, you want to probe further and find out what exactly is happening. When you have people that are trying to dress up to hide, and you can tell they're trying to hide something, they probably have a visible mark caused by a perpetrator that they're trying to hide. Or if suddenly they become withdrawn or have sudden anger issues, then that would be telling of domestic violence incidences happening in their life. Now, that said, it is important that we don't wait until those signs become real acts of violence. But unfortunately, that is what normally happens, and that is how cases get reported, when the actual violence has already happened. And when it has happened, and you know, some people have said, is it the only solution to addressing incidences of violence? No, shelters are not the only solutions. But in incidences where, you know, the incidences are so serious and extreme, you know, there is incest, there is rape within a family from a close relative, a father, it's probably happening in school, then you want that person out into a place of safety. And what we are saying as civil society organizations is that we are able and willing to partner with the government to provide support when it comes to shelters. But in terms of provision of infrastructure and ensuring that there is sustainability in terms of the human resource that is required to ensure that a shelter does not become a place of harm, but becomes a place of adding value and of healing, we are saying that we need the government to take on that responsibility, even as it seeks out partnership with CSOs and development partners to support the same.
Right. Quickly, how people can get in touch with you. If somebody's in need of help, how do they get in touch with COVAW?
So COVAW has a hotline. So if you call 0800-720-553.
Right, we got it.
You will receive help.
All right. Thank you so much, Wairimu. That's 0800-720-553, and we're going to try and ensure that number is scrolling at the bottom of our screen as well. My many thanks to our guests tonight, Court of Appeal Judge Martha Koome, Deputy Governor of Makueni County, Adelina Mwau, and Wairimu Munyinyi-Wahome, the Executive Director of COVAW.